And don't forget, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast. AWF Union Podcast. Let's go to line number 2. And welcome Jason Walsh to the show. No stranger to America's workforce. He's been on before on behalf of the BlueGreen Alliance, where he serves as executive director. Website, real simple, bluegreenalliance.org. And we're talking about creating jobs, family-sustaining jobs, alternative means of energy, which right now is in a state of flux. Jason, welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining us today. How long now as executive director for the BlueGreen Alliance?
I have been executive director since 2019. Good to be back with you, Flash.
I appreciate that. And, just to refresh our listeners, I know you've been on before. A little background on yourself. How do you got to where you are today? Go ahead.
Well, I'm kind of old, so it was a long and circuitous path. I've worked in a bunch of different roles as an organizer, as an advocate. I had the privilege of working in federal service during the Obama administration, both at the Department of Energy and in the White House. And I have, again, had the privilege of running the BlueGreen Alliance for almost 6 years now.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with being old. That means you got experience. That's
There
good
you go.
experience. And
And
we,
no
we
hair.
need you to share that knowledge with our listeners here. Well, let's start with defending civil service. We've got an attack going on all federal workers in Washington. I'm sure that you've been paying attention to that. And we've got this billionaire by the name of Elon Musk involved in this whole thing. You know, when billionaires are like kind of dictating what should happen to workers, I think that's raising a few eyebrows here, yours included. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, eyebrows, my entire body, every red flag that I own. Yeah. So, as you rightly stated, we have Donald Trump and his, I guess, unelected co-president, Elon Musk, waging a full-scale assault on the federal civil service. This is over 2 million workers across the country, over 1 million of whom are union members. And to be clear, the vast majority don't live in DC. They live in Ohio, they live in Pennsylvania, they live in Texas, they live all over the place. Some of the background here, Flash, is important, right? So when a civil servant starts a job with the U.S. government, they take an oath of office to serve the American people. And that's what they do, right?
Mhm.
They protect the rights and health and safety of workers on the job. They keep our air and water clean. They serve our veterans. They protect our homeland and a hell of a lot more. The history is important too. The civil service was created over a century ago to ensure that the federal government's workforce was completely apolitical, right? That followed the law, that served the American people instead of the elected political leader in any given moment. Right? And this followed decades of abuse by politicians, right, who used government positions to steer taxpayer dollars to their cronies and their donors, right, who put their own personal enrichment of themselves and their buddies over the public benefit. If that description sounds familiar, it's because it perfectly describes Donald Trump, who, yes, was elected president, but wasn't elected as our monarch, which he is acting as if he is, alongside his queen, Elon Musk, who is the world's richest man, who is a longtime union buster, who, along with his gang of tech nerd sociopaths, is going agency by agency, illegally firing thousands of workers, deleting entire federal programs authorized by Congress, holding up money already appropriated by Congress, and presumably positioning Musk to get billions of dollars more in federal contracts for all of his businesses, because apparently he's not rich enough. So what stands in their way are well, first of all of us, but importantly, the civil service and their unions. So of course, these guys are going to try to destroy them.
Yeah. Workers are under attack. Unions are under attack. I'm glad you didn't hold back. you really laid it out. That's what this show's all about. Okay,
you don't hold back, Flash. I'm not going to hold back.
No way. Inflation Reduction Act. I know that didn't get any Republican support when Biden went forward with it. Although the communities where Republicans preside over, they were taking credit for some of those projects. I know that. Talk to me about the future here when it comes to solar and wind, because we were moving in the right direction. We were creating jobs. I know the trades were involved in those jobs. All of that right now is kind of questionable. I'd like to get your perspective. Where do we stand right now? Is it going to be over or what? Yeah,
great question. Let me give a little bit of background. So, as you just noted, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed by Congress. Every Democrat supported it, every Republican opposed it, but it was passed by Congress, right? And it was signed into law by the President of the United States, Joe Biden, back in 2022. And it represents not only the biggest ever investment in clean energy deployment anywhere in the world, it also is, in our minds, the fullest embodiment of industrial policy in this country since the New Deal, right? It makes a bunch of investments in economic sectors that are of strategic importance to the United States and its people, not to mention the fate of the planet. And it attaches conditions on those investments, on those taxpayer dollars, so they deliver benefits for workers and communities. You mentioned the building trades. For the first time ever in the Inflation Reduction Act, labor standards were attached to clean energy tax credits, right? That's just one example, right? Yeah. But just with that one provision, we're able to elevate job quality within entire sectors and drive much more energy work, installation, deployment, to union contractors, to union workers. All of that is now at risk. And it's at risk in two ways. The first way is that the Trump administration has frozen, illegally, unconstitutionally, frozen money that goes out in grants and loans that has already been obligated. In English, that means it's already under contract, right? Companies are hiring and making investment decisions based on these contracts. And the federal government is freezing the money, right? This is not abstract. These are construction projects, manufacturing projects in Ohio and Pennsylvania, all over the country, frozen. Now, the courts have said, you need to stop doing that, because it says very clearly in the US Constitution that Congress has the power of the purse. Right. Congress appropriates. And we actually have legislation called the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 that clarifies what the Constitution says, right? Very clear. The Supreme Court, Justice Department, Government Accountability Office are all in accordance on this. So the initial court rulings are, agencies, you must unfreeze this money, but they're not doing it, right? And so, like, if you go on the Department of Energy's website right now, any of your listeners, energy.gov, you will see at the top of the screen court orders. You can actually read the court order. There's one I would encourage folks to read from a U.S. District Court in Rhode Island that basically lays out how illegal everything the Department of Energy is doing right now is. So that is happening. And that, look, ultimately, I think this is going to go to the Supreme Court. And I think we are rushing headlong to a constitutional crisis. So that's one means that they're trying to kill the IRA. The other means is that they are trying to extend a whole set of tax breaks that were enacted in 2017 in Trump's first term. That, and we could quote here reams of data. I'm going to spare you and your listeners, but the bottom line is that it disproportionately benefits the wealthiest Americans and corporate America, right?
Yeah.
Republicans in Congress and the Trump administration want to extend those. They want to expand them. The only way they can pay for it is by robbing money that hasn't yet been spent from the Inflation Reduction Act, primarily in the form of tax credits. Again, this is all stuff creating jobs, reshoring manufacturing to the United States from other countries, remaking our transportation system and our energy system in order to pay for tax cuts for billionaires.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's on one level it's complicated. On another level, it's very, very simple. Yeah. So they're moving that now. They are moving that legislation through Congress because it does take an act of Congress to actually do this. I don't know if the Trump administration actually agrees with that, but the law says an act of Congress is necessary to basically kill these tax credits and spend them on something else. And that's what they're trying to do. And a whole bunch of people are trying to stop that, including us.
What we're going to see here is a spike in unemployment because you mentioned they had contracts together. They're ready to hire workers. Yeah. And probably in some cases they have already done that. But if the money's not there, it's all going to go away. All going to go away. Let me ask you about chips and science, because Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, said, well, maybe we should take a look at that. You probably know what's going on in Central Ohio with the Intel plant, and it's becoming the new Silicon Valley. Amazon, Google. I mean, it's like the San Francisco of the Midwest. What's going to happen there? I mean, and you know what? I want to throw this at you, too. Scott Paul, you probably know Scott from the Alliance for American Manufacturing. You know, when all this happened under Biden, one of the things he said on this show was, Flash, we finally have a manufacturing strategy. We haven't had one. You know, other countries, Germany has one, and it's been very successful for a long time. Like I said, around the world, a lot of countries have it. We finally have it. Is that going to be blown up now as well, Jason?
I don't know. I mean, chips and science, as you know, this was passed on a bipartisan basis, right? A supermajority in the U.S. Senate voted to approve it. If I had to bet money, given the Republican support for it, I would bet that probably they would allow that money to keep going. But even if they do, let's be clear, right? Because those weren't just big awards to big companies like Intel. If you look at the details of those agreements, right, they include things like project labor agreements, right, for union construction workers. They include things like working with labor and community partners to develop workforce pipelines. They include things like this company is going to make these investments in this community where the project is being set up. Even if they go forward, you can bet all the money in the world that the Commerce Department under a Trump administration is not going to honor any of those commitments. And in fact, if you look at the Department of Energy, they've already sent around a memo to all of their awardees that the community benefit plans, right, that include all of this kind of stuff, including worker health and safety and a bunch of other stuff, all of those incredibly important details, right, that get to this point of like, we're not just talking about benefits to corporations, we're talking about benefits to workers, right, and to communities, right. The Department of Energy basically in one memo said you have to stop doing all of this stuff. That's pretty telling. But the larger point here, and you're right to make it, is that, chips and science alongside the infrastructure law, alongside the Inflation Reduction Act, represent coherent industrial policy, coherent manufacturing policy that starts to make up for decades of the lack of all of that. And frankly, decades of really terrible trade policy that effectively offshored much of our manufacturing base with all kinds of consequences for working people across the country and for our security as a nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
With these three laws, we are starting to rebuild that manufacturing base. And now the Trump administration is taking a sledgehammer to that foundation as we're trying to rebuild it.
Yeah, he was handed one heck of an economy. And sadly, the messaging from the previous administration, that did not translate to voters. And I don't know what happened there. That's another conversation. But Jason, I appreciate you coming to the table here and and telling it like it is. I mean, that's what this show is all about. Jason Walsh, Executive Director of the Blue Green Alliance. BlueGreenAlliance.org is the website. I see more conversations happening in the not too distant future. You ready for those?
I am. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about.